Well, let's get started. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about AI and the experimental feature that we just added to Fusion 4.8. Hopefully, everybody here that has Fusion is running that version and has either played with it or will be able to play with it once we're finished.
Mhm.
We're going to cover some basics of AI as well. I'm curious, just as we get started. How many of you have actually used an AI chat agent of some type, Chat GPT or Claude or Copilot or something like that? Feel free to unmute and just let me know if you have or haven't. Help give me an idea of where we're at.
Mostly just since the intro to Fusion Anywhere a few weeks ago. We used it since then.
Okay, so fairly new on that aspect then.
Yep.
Anyone else want to comment?
I've played with it.
Daryl, you have? Okay. For how many months would you say you've been playing with it?
Uh, Probably a year.
Okay, good amount of time. Anyone else?
I'm a little familiar, but I don't usually typically use it.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, that gives me a starting point here. Um, Sorry, let me just check to see if I need to let anyone else in. No, it looks like we're good. So what I'm hoping to do then is I'll start at a pretty basic level today and cover just AI in general, and then we'll move into this experimental feature. And then I hope to show you some examples of how to get an AI to behave more like you want it to behave when you're asking it questions, especially the kinds of questions you might be asking with Fusion related data or other feedlot data as well. So I think I have about 30 or 40 minutes of material here, plus questions. I'd like this to be pretty informal, so feel free to just stop and interrupt me at any point with questions. And I'd rather just address them as we go along, I think. And then, of course, we can do more questions at the end as well. So let's start with some very basics. We often use the term AI. You hear that all the time in the last 3 or 4 years, in the news especially. It stands for artificial intelligence. And the reality is that there really isn't any intelligence here. It's a fun science fiction term to use, but it really isn't intelligence. It's just math and statistics running in the background. And the idea that it's going to become really smart and have feelings someday doesn't really make a lot of sense when you understand how it actually works underneath, but it makes for a good news story. What's really going on underneath with most AIs is what we refer to as an LLM or a large language model. And we're not going to get into the details of how that works, other than to realize that um, it just involves a lot of really advanced statistics and enough data that's in there where it can look at patterns of words or patterns of what we call tokens and predict what the next one should be. And so when you ask a question, it's taking your question, it's taking this huge, enormous large language model, and it's running it through all the calculations and it's predicting what the next word should be that makes sense, which is the beginning of your answer. And then it looks at the next one and the next one until it completes your answer. And that's all that's really going on there. But they're very powerful and extremely useful when used correctly and when used well. So what is an AI good at? An AI is really good at summarizing information. It's really good at comparing, especially textual type things. It's great at pattern finding because it can see a large block of text at the same time in a way and sort of We're going to use words like reason, although it's not technically reasoning, but I don't know how else to talk about it. So it's like it's reasoning about a big chunk at the same time. Where with a human, we're often limited with just a little bit that we can see and what we can remember. So they're good at finding patterns that we can't see, which is great. They're good at suggesting follow-up questions when you're asking about things. One thing they're also really good at, which is important to remember, is they are very confident when they're wrong. They they have no idea about the difference between when they're right or when they're wrong, and so their confidence level is the same. There are some ways to work around that, and we'll address that a little bit later on, but it is important to remember that that's the case. Also, they will fill in gaps when they don't know the answer. So their whole purpose is to, again, try and run through this statistical model and complete a sentence or a paragraph or a whole answer. And if it comes to a section of, excuse me, information that it doesn't know the answer to, it's going to make something up. And it's important to learn how to deal with that to make sure that doesn't happen. It's they can make mistakes, especially with math. They are getting better, not because the large language models themselves are better at doing math, because they don't understand what math is or that it's dealing with numbers. It sees numbers and text exactly the same. But there are tools that are starting to be run in the background that try and identify when you're asking a math related question, and they sort of shunt that off into a different system that can hopefully answer it and then push it back. So math is getting better, but do be aware that it's you wouldn't want to ask an AI something you could probably ask a calculator or use a spreadsheet for in most cases. They are, however, really good at reasoning about formulas or calculations or telling you the best way to come up with a calculation or an algorithm. They're quite good at that, but you probably still want to run the math through your own spreadsheet or calculator if needed. So. It's really good, I think, to treat answers that an AI gives you more as a suggestion or something to investigate. Always keep your spidey sense up and don't just take it as a final decision. So that's a few things. Probably if you've been using an AI for a few months or been watching any YouTube videos or anything where people are talking about it, you might have known much of that already, but hopefully a good reminder, especially if you're new to using an AI. At the end of the day, it is a tool, and I've been using it for several years now, getting pretty deep into how to use it. And what I found is like with any other tool, if it's not understood or if it's misused, it can come back to bite you. But if it is understood and if you use it well, if you build your skills to know how to use it effectively, it can be very, very powerful and very helpful and very give you a lot of time savings in your life. So nothing to be scared of, just another tool to learn. I wanted to cover a few um, definitions, I guess, of words we might encounter out in the AI world and even in this class today. Again, these are just very basic ones. I've only got a few. The first one is a prompt. And a prompt is the text that you write when you ask the AI a question. And we'll have lots of examples of those today, but that's officially called a prompt. So I'll be referring to that from time to time. A conversation, also sometimes known as a session, is when you ask a question, it gives you a response. You ask another question, another response. You go back and forth in the same thread. We usually call it a conversation or a session. And we'll show you how you can have multiple sessions going on at the same time, which is actually a really important principle to know. There's another thing that's good to be aware of, which is called a context window. And the reason that's good to be aware of is because um, as smart as an AI seems like it can only remember so much stuff at once. And it's actually not a lot of stuff. So when you ask it a question, let's say it's this much of a question, that goes into the context window. And then when it gives you an answer, that goes in the context window. So now the context window's gotten bigger. If you ask another question, the context window fills up more and more. But there is a limit to it. And if the closer it gets to filling the context window, the slower and also the dumber the AI will seem. And so I'll explain more about that a little bit later, and I'll show you some ways to work around that. But it is important to remember that all AIs have a limited context window, can only remember so many things. So a hallucination, I'm pretty sure you've probably heard that before. It's just referring to the idea that an AI hallucinates, can make things up, can be confidently wrong, as we said before. In some ways, that's actually a benefit of an AI. So many things we do in computers are very, what would the word be? Very like exact or precise, or there's another word that's not coming to my mind right now. Deterministic, that's what it is. Most things in a computer are very deterministic, and it's actually hard to make a computer do something that's truly random. Um, However, the way an AI works, it seems very random and they seem non-deterministic. And that can be useful when you're asking for it. Just give me ideas, or you're trying to brainstorm with it and you really want it to think outside the box. That's actually great. There's other times when you don't want it to be that way. And so there you have to employ some techniques that restrain it so that it's less, so it's more deterministic. But do be aware that they can hallucinate. That's the term we use when it's giving you a wrong answer confidently. So um, there's a couple things I want to show with an AI. I'm going to share my screen and show you some things here. All right. Hopefully everyone's able to see. Let's see, I need to move some windows around here. Sorry. The pictures I can see of you guys are all right in my way. Let's see if I can move them to somewhere else. Okay, there we go. So in this demonstration today, this meeting, I'm going to be using ChatGPT. You could just as easily use Claude or Copilot, or there's a whole bunch of them out there. And feel free to use whatever one you want. What I want to show you here is that most of the AI chatbots, as we call them, have some settings, and they might look different in yours, but I'm going to show you how it works in mine. The one I want to really point out is this personalization setting, whatever it might be called in yours. When I talk to an I don't want it to go on and on. I don't really need it to tell me how great I am and how smart my question was and how wonderful my life is or anything like that. I just want an answer. And so I've changed the way it responds. The base style and tone, for example, there's a lot of different options here. I want it to be efficient. I want it to be concise and plain. Um, the warmth level. Do I want it to be friendly and personable? No, I just want it to be professional and factual. And the enthusiasm level. I really don't need the excitement and energy from an AI in my life right now. I just want an answer. And there's some other options here. I show that to you for two reasons. First of all, so that you know that you do have some control over what the responses will be like with your chat agent. And second of all, to get an understanding of any answers we're getting here, if they vary a lot from what you're getting, it might be because of the settings I've decided to use here. So, okay. The other thing I want to show two more things that are common across most chat bots, chat agents. I'll probably use different terminology there. this area down here for me is the prompt area. And so when I can just, type in a question, this is my question, whatever. But there's a little bit of a trick here. I'm on a Mac, and so if I hold the Option key down when I type return or hit the return key, I actually get a chance to just put an end of line character in there, and then I can continue on. This is more of a question. And then if I hit return, it's going to do the same as if I click this button, and it's going to send the question off to get a response. But if I hold Option down, then I can get some more lines in there. If you're on a Windows computer, it's probably going to be the Alt key, I think, that you would hold down for that. But that can become useful when you're trying to ask, when you're trying to prompt it with longer and more strict and better prompts, which you'll see today. So that's just one little tip. I'll show you some other tips later on how to for prompting as well. So I think that is all for the terms. I'm just checking my notes. Yeah, that's everything for the notes. So let me just pause there for a second. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Nope. Okay, very good. Um, so let's see. I do want to mention that there are other tools beside chatbots. So I use a bunch of them myself that are far more powerful than a chatbot and can do a lot more than just what a chatbot can do. They include being able to work with skills and tools and some of those kind of things. If you've heard about those before, we're not going to cover that sort of thing in today's class. We're going to stay pretty simple with just a regular chatbot. So, but just be aware there are more powerful tools out there if you're interested. All right. Before we get into the experimental feature itself, we've had some questions in the past about data privacy, and I think it's really important to understand how your data might be used if you use a chatbot. So the first thing to remember is that, and I'll just stop sharing my screen here for a second. So you can see me. The first thing to remember is that Fusion by default is very data privacy centric. All data stays on your server. It doesn't go anywhere unless you let it go somewhere. For example, there's the lot info export, which some people like to set up that sends specific pieces of data off to other companies that they have an agreement with, and they can do things from there. But by default, Fusion keeps all of your data in one place. The second thing to know is that in this feature, which we'll be showing, there is a way for you to get bits of data out of Fusion and give it to an AI prompt. That's what we'll be demonstrating today. When you're using a chatbot, most of the chatbot companies will use that data that's coming in to train future models. And they also usually have a data retention policy, so they might keep your data for 30 days or 90 days or potentially forever. I really don't think that little pieces of feedlot data that make it into a training model are going to actually matter to your business, but that's a decision that each of you needs to make. But just realize that when we put some data in, and as I'll be showing later in the class, that data could be used to train the model on or future models on. If we turn this in to a real feature, which is, we're waiting to get feedback from everybody on how well this works. But if we turn this into a real feature that's actually fully embedded in Fusion, we'll be able to use the API models instead of the chatbot models. And what that means is there's options to turn data retention off and training off in your own account. And so as a real feature, the worry about your data being used somewhere by these companies isn't something you need to worry about. So, uh, okay, I think I've covered that. Let me go back to sharing my screen and we'll get into actually doing some work here. So here's Fusion. The first thing I want to show you is how you can get some specific data out of Fusion so that you can use it with a chatbot for playing around with, and also so you get an idea of what that data looks like. And so there's three places right now in Fusion 4.8 where you can get some data out that's suitable for use with a chatbot. You can use the advanced print report to send out like a CSV file or something like that, and you could also use that. But these are specific, these ones I'm going to show you today are specific for an AI. And so in the lot center window, all you need to do is select a lot, whatever lot you care about. You can select multiple lots if you want. And when you have the lot selected that you're interested in, just click this new AI button that's up here in the top right of that window. And that will bring up this window. And this window has two purposes. The top part here is a place where, as you use this, we hope that you'd be willing to give us some feedback. Maybe you put some prompts in here you found that were really useful. Just type something in if you like it, or if there's something that didn't work. If you hit the send button, it comes to me, it gives me some feedback and helps me as I work on the next feature. So please feel free to use that. That'd be great. The main part of the window, though, is right here at the bottom. You'll see that it's telling us that files will be created for two selected lots. That's how many lots were selected back here. By default, it's going to create some files on the desktop in a folder called Fusion AI. You can change that if you want, depending on what you're doing. I'm going to leave it just like that, and so I'm just going to click Save. You'll see that on my desktop, I now have a folder called Fusion AI. If I open that up and take a look at it, there are two files in there. They're kind of named based on the name of the lot. You can see I had lot L22 and L23 selected. Lot L22 and 23 were the two files that were created. These files are called JSON files. You don't really need to know what JSON is to use these files, but I will open one up just so you can get an idea of what's inside of it. This is something that an AI generally understands quite well, even if it doesn't look, it might look funny to a human unless you're a programmer, but it just has a bunch of information. For example, it has the lot name, the lot status. This one's fully closed. Knows there's 247 lot days, and you can scroll down and there's all kinds of data in there. I'm not going to go through all of it, but feel free to open that up on your own system and take a look and see what data is in there if you want. Gives you an idea of what is actually being sent up. So, all right, I will close that. So we've talked about how to get data out of the lot center. By the way, if let's say it was a few days later and I came back and some things had changed about this lot and I selected it and I chose that and hit save again. All it's going to do is just update that file. So you can leave this running or leave this folder on your desktop if you want, and know that you can just use it over and over again. It'll just replace the file or clean up however you want there. So one of the other places is the pens. So when you go from the lot center, it's going to spit out a whole bunch of information about the lot itself. When you do it from the pen list window, it's going to spit out a whole bunch of information about the pen. So I'm just going to select one pen here. I'll click the AI button. Exactly the same window pops up. And if I click save, if I look inside this folder again, we'll see there's now a pen JSON, pen one. If I open that up, you'll see, kind of some similar type of information there. We can see some of today's or yesterday's information. Doesn't look like I chose a great pen there because we got a lot of zeros, so it's probably empty right now. But gives you an idea of how that works. Finally, the last place in Fusion is if you go to Fusion Shoot Side and you list your animals. I have to move this over so I can see the whole window. And then, again, choose whatever animals you have to be interested in. There's an AI button up here. Same window comes up, and again, just click Save. It generates those files. And if we look back at the folder, we can now see that there's some animal JSON files. It usually just uses the RFID number if it's available for the file name. If not, it'll try and use a tag number. But if I look inside there, you'll see again, it's just a whole bunch of information about that animal, including shoot side events and things like that. Okay, so 3 windows, 3 ways to get information out. One is lot centric, one is pen centric, and one is animal centric. So, any questions on that so far? Okay, good. I am going to switch back to here. I've actually prepared a different one so that I'm ready to go here. So I have a folder open here. We're going to be referring to a bunch of files in this. Just so you know, I've actually created a handout that we'll put in the Zoom meeting later on that has all the prompts or all the examples that I'm going to share with you today, so that you'll be able to use those later on. But this will be my little cheat sheet here. So I want to talk about how to build a prompt next. I suspect that many of the people in this meeting, when you build a prompt, you basically just ask a simple question. And maybe I'll give a little bit of an example. I didn't think of this ahead of time, but I might just say something like, I don't know, what is Fusion and how can it help um, in my feedlot? We'll see if it even knows what Fusion is. But very simple, just a quick little question. We haven't given a lot of direction, and all right, it comes back with an answer, which is wonderful. I think that's how many of us use these, and it's almost like just asking a quick question, getting a response, basically like an advanced Google search. It's probably a good way to think of it. And that's fine, especially if you're just brainstorming or you just have a quick question. That mode of using a chat is totally fine, and it works really well in a lot of situations. When it comes to analyzing data for your feedlot, you want to go beyond that so that you can get more precise answers and more consistent answers. And so we're going to show how that works. Start a new chat here. Now, the other thing that's important here is where these files come in. So I've got, I need to move things around again. So here's some of the files that were exported from Fusion, and we're going to be using these. Let's see, I think I need to move this up here. That's going to be easier. We're going to be moving these by attaching a file to each of our prompts. So to start off with, I'm just going to grab this, one of the lots, lot L82, and I'm going to drop it down in the chat. And what that does is it takes this JSON file and it makes it part of the context window so that when we ask questions, it knows the information that's in this file. It actually got uploaded to ChatGPT's servers in this case. So, oh, actually, I got ahead of myself. Um, let me share. Let me share this first. I wanted to talk about the prompt structure when you're not just simply talking or brainstorming. Here are some of the things to keep in mind. Not every one of your prompts needs to have exactly all of these things, but the more you do this, or the more you think of these items in a prompt, the more useful the prompt will be. So let's talk about each one for just a moment. The context or the background. An LLM or an AI knows a lot of stuff, if we use knows in quotes, knows a lot of stuff about the world, everything it was trained on, but it won't know anything about you or about your specific business unless you give it that information. And that's the context. You always want to give it enough context or background that it knows how to answer for your specific situation. In our example, when I added this file, that actually was, we could consider that the context. It now knows about the lot, or it will know about the lot. The role or persona, or what the audience is, um, an AI can act as if it's different people, or it knows how to respond differently. If you ask it to give an answer to a 5-year-old child, or give an answer to I don't know, an English professor, it can form the language that it uses very differently. It might use short words, short sentences for the child, something different for the professor. If it knows that you want it, if you're like a feed manager at a feedlot, or if you're an owner or whatever, it can tailor its answers more specifically to that. So it's helpful to have that in there. A task, you want to give the AI a very specific task to perform. If you leave it open in general, it's just going to choose some random stuff. But if you can give it a very specific task, it's able to kind of narrow in and give you better results. Constraints or style rules. Constraints, you kind of want to limit. This is kind of when you're figuring out your task. You want to limit the AI to only doing certain things. You might tell it, don't make things up, or you might tell it to only use the attached file for your information, or whatever. And we'll have some examples of that. The more you do that, the better it'll be. If you can have some examples of output, that's even better because they're so good at pattern recognition. And part of that would be an output specification. I'll show an example of that later on. And you can even tell it how to handle errors and that type of thing. And the more you do that, the more likely you'll get what you want. So, all right, so we've attached this lot. I think that you would probably all agree if I just said, was this lot good? You're probably going to get an answer, but that's not really covering all of the ideas for a good prompt. And so I'm not even going to enter that one in. Instead, I'm going to grab this one right here, this file, and I'm going to just copy this prompt in, and I'm going to paste this prompt. Now let's go through it a little bit. Review this lot from the perspective of a feedlot manager. So here we're explaining what the role is, what perspective this all should be in. And we're starting to constrain it so it knows that we're talking about this lot. It'll know that we mean the thing we attached. Use only the attached Fusion export. Summarize the lot's performance, then identify the strongest and weakest area. So we're giving you a very specific task here. Notice we're giving it some guardrails. We're explaining exactly what we want to have happen. If profitability, death loss, feed conversion, or cost of gain are included, comment on them specifically. So now we're narrowing the task down even further, and we're starting to, well, the next sentence here will start to tell it what to do if there's errors. If any of those are missing, say they are missing. So don't, in other words, we're tell it, don't make something up. If it's missing, just say that. Give me a short list of items I should verify in Fusion before drawing conclusions. Okay, so we've basically hit all of the ideas for a good prompt. Let's hit return and we'll just see what we come up with. Now, while it's coming back with a response here, I'm going to let you know as we go through these different prompt examples, what I really want to focus on is the prompt itself, because these are prompts that you can use, or at least use the pattern of when you're dealing with your own data. I'm not going to spend much time on the actual output of the LLMs in this class. And the reason is because, first of all, it doesn't matter for you because this isn't your data. And second of all, a lot of this data is just made up data for a demo database that we have. So it's probably not going to make a lot of sense anyway. But it will give you a bit of an idea of the kind of information that can come back. We did ask it to summarize the lot's performance, and you can see that's the first thing it did. Overall performance, gave us a summary. It did focus on the things we asked it to. Death loss is in there. Let's see, feed conversion, yes. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're probably there. We asked it specifically to talk about profitability, death loss, feed conversion, cost of gain, which it did. We also asked it to give us the strongest, how did we say it? Let's see. Yeah, we said identify the strongest and weakest areas. So now here's the strongest areas, here's the weakest areas, told us whether or not any of the metrics were missing. And then remember at the end, we'd asked it to give us a short list of items that needed to be verified in Fusion just to decide whether or not true or not. So it did that here in this section. And then we ask it to draw a conclusion. And there it is. So the point there is just that by having a pretty specific prompt, we got a pretty specific answer. We really were able to drive the AI and tell us exactly what to do there. Okay. All right. I'll stop again for a minute. Any questions so far? All right. It's time to explain another principle that's involved when you're working with an AI. If we wanted to ask a question about another lot, like let's say we wanted to ask a question about this lot, what some people might do is they would then drag this lot in and ask a question about it. Normally, that's not what you want to do though. And just recall your memory to when we were talking about a context window and how AI can only remember so many things. Because we asked about lot L82 here, it was no problem to continue asking more questions about that lot, at least for a while. And we could certainly do that in this conversation or this session. But if we wanted to start talking about another lot, we're better off creating a new conversation because then it starts with a new context window and it's less likely to get confused by the data that was already there from the previous lot or the previous answers. So that's really important to remember. When you're just brainstorming, no problem, just keep talking as long as you, well, within reason for as long as you want. But when you want good structured answers, think about starting a new conversation fairly often, especially when it's something new. So I'm going to go through four new prompts or four different prompts right now, just again to show examples of how these prompts can work. And I'm going to start with a new context window in each one, or a new conversation, I should say. So the first one, I'm going to use example one as my prompt. So this is what the prompt is going to be. And we're going to use the same lot before. So I'm going to drag that lot in. It now has the context of that lot. And I'm just going to copy that prompt here. And I'm going to paste it in here. And let's look at it. And keep those prompt ideas in mind as we go through this. Analyze this lot for a feedlot manager. Use only the attached Fusion export. Provide a short plain language summary, any unusual results or events worth investigating, the main performance or cost drivers shown in the data points that look missing, incomplete, or unclear, and follow-up questions I should ask in Fusion or with my team. Do not make a final recommendation. Treat this as an investigation aid. And so I'll just pop back to this for a second. You can see we have the context, we have the role, we've given it a specific task along with some constraints. And we haven't given a really specific output specification, but we're still telling it basically follow these 5 steps. which is pretty close to that same idea. Okay, so I'll just gonna let it run and we'll see if the general output is roughly what we wanted. All right, so we did ask for a short plain language summary. Well, there's our short plain language summary. We asked it to show any unusual results, and that is actually the second one that came up here. And then we asked it to find the main, see, I need to keep scrolling back and forth here. Main performance or cost drivers. Yep, main performance or cost drivers. Um, Missing and incomplete or unclear data. Came up with a few things there. Some follow-up questions to ask in Fusion or with your team. These can be pretty interesting because it's easy for us to kind of get in a rut with our thinking in our operations. And using AI is a good way of kind of thinking outside the box, just having it ask you questions. And it just tells us here that it's not, basically it's telling us it's not going to create its own conclusion, telling us what to do. So that's an example. Again, I really want to point out that by giving it a very specific prompt, we got back a very specific answer that is exactly the kind of thing we wanted. So let's do a second one now. This time we're going to compare two different lots. And so again, if I wanted to follow up and ask more questions about this particular lot, I would stay in this conversation. But now, because I'm switching to something new, I'm actually going to create a new conversation. And in this case, I know I want to compare two lots. So I'm going to actually drag both of these so that it has the context for both of these lots. And then we're going to go to example 2. Now, here's another little principle, or I guess more of a tip for you. Notice that I have these prompts already prepared. I'm not just sitting there trying to remember how to prompt each time. What I would recommend you do is something similar to this. There's lots of ways of doing it, but basically, when you work on a prompt and you get the prompt to get the output that's helpful to you, save that prompt in a text file or a note or someplace so that you can just grab it, just like I'm doing here. I'm just copying this out of the file, pasting it in there, and that's great because now I don't have to type that in every time, and it gives you very repeatable results for each kind of task that you're doing when you ask for help in figuring out your data or having the AI look at your data. So, all right, let's look at this one quickly. Compare these exported Fusion lot files for a feedlot manager. Use only the attached files. Create a table showing the most important differences you can find. So, well, we should get a table when we're done. Then explain which differences appear most likely to matter operationally, separate direct facts from possible explanations, and with the checks I should do in Fusion before trusting the comparison. Okay, straightforward. It basically ticks all the box. Let's see if the AI can do this. All right, spending some time thinking. We'll give it a minute. If it gets too slow, then I'll just go on to something else. Any questions or comments at this point while we're waiting for it? All right. Uh, while it's working, I'm gonna, oh, well, never mind. It's coming in. Yeah, it's still thinking. All right. I'm going to create another conversation and we'll go ahead with the next prompt and we'll come back and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So the next prompt, example 3, has to do with pens. And so I'm going to just copy this one. I'm going to paste it in here. It says review these pen exports for patterns that a yard manager might care about. Use only the attached Fusion exports. Look for outliers, differences between pens, anything that may deserve a closer look. Do not assume a cause unless the data supports it. Give the answer as, and then we have our pattern for how we want the answers. Key observations, possible explanations, what I should verify next, and questions. This one needs two different pens, so let's get those dropped in here at the same time. So that one is ready to go. Just wait for this to finish uploading. All right. And let's let it get going. Now I want to, while it's working, I'm going to go back to this one and just see where it's at. Looks like it's mostly done, maybe all the way done. So as a reminder, we were looking at two different lots and it wanted us to do some comparisons and have a table. And so as we look at it, sure enough, it created a table, a comparison between the two lots. Great. We're not going to look at the exact data. And then it gets into some information about the differences here, operationally important difference, possible explanations, checks to do in Fusion, and it's actually still working. So, but you get the idea that it's trying to follow our pattern there. Let's pop back to the pen one, scroll back up to the top here. You remember in this one, we ask it for key observations, possible explanations, etc. Let's just see if it did that. And yeah, it looks like key observations. It figured out some of those. Some possible explanations. Great, it did that for us. We did ask it to verify what we need to verify in Fusion. So it gives us a list there and then some questions to ask to find out more about what those differences were. Even gives us a primary pattern down here, which I'll just leave there. So, okay, I'm going to do one more of these kind of examples before we switch to another topic for a moment. It looks like I went longer than my 30 to 40 minutes like I promised. And so I was very wrong about that, but we are getting closer toward the end. This is example 4. I just want to do one with an animal as well. So I'm just going to copy that. Again, we're going to start a new conversation here and we'll paste that in. And I'm just going to grab one of these animals. Doesn't really matter which one I grab for the sake of the demo. So the prompt in this case, summarize this animal's treatment and performance history from the attached Fusion export. Use only the data in the file, highlight any events, dates, treatments, diagnoses, or performance details that appear important. Do not give veterinarian advice. End with questions I should review with the appropriate animal health person if anything looks concerning. Okay. By the way, these prompts are covering, I tried to choose prompts that were relatively short, probably longer than you're used to using, I'm going to guess, but relatively short, that would still cover the, more or less cover the prompt structure that makes a good structure. But it's totally fine to have a much longer prompt. Some of the prompts I use could easily be a page long for very specific things that I'm looking for. So here's our example. It gives us a summary of treatment and health events, just like we asked. Gives us a little bit of a health history. We've got some indicators there, some notable points, and some questions to review. And again, I just really want to call your attention that the output here isn't just random output. It's actually answering the question we gave very specifically because we gave it a specific task to perform. So, okay, so that's just some examples of how you might ask some questions for lots, for pens, for animals. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and give a little bit of a different type of an example. Let's say that we had just asked some extra questions here. I don't even know, I should have thought of some questions ahead of time, but actually, I'm not even going to worry about it. Let's say we were having a conversation with this animal. It had gone on for quite a while, And we were learning a lot. We realized I kind of want to repeat the same type of a conversation with other animals. How do you capture all of that into a prompt? Well, you can write the prompt yourself, or you can do something like this example here is showing. So let me just grab and copy this one. I'm going to paste it in this one. Notice I'm staying in the same conversation because we're pretending we've been in this conversation for quite a while. And I'm going to post this here or paste this here. Feedlot Manager, learning how to use AI. Suggest 10 practical questions. Oh, sorry, I actually got ahead of myself. Um, this is a different thing, but let's just go with it for a minute. No, we're not going to go with it. Let me get back. This is the one I was setting up for. We'll go back to that one in a second. You could say something like this, and again, you can copy and paste this. This conversation produces a useful way to analyze exported Fusion data. Summarize the approach into a reusable prompt template. And then we describe kind of what the prompt should include. And I'll hit return and let it do its work. But in this case, it's kind of trying to figure out, okay, what is the what is the template I could use for future prompts? And here it is. I'm not going to take the time to actually go through all of that with you, but what you can do at this point is I think this is a little copy button up here, copy, and I could just create a new text file and paste that in. And now I have a prompt, quite a long one in this case, that's going, every time I use it, it's going to create a similar conversation to this with whatever animal that I've chosen to use it on. And so the point here is that you can use the AI to help you write prompts that repeat things that you want it to write, and it's going to write a really good prompt for you. Okay. All right, now let's go to the example I was going that I accidentally brought up here. And I'm just going to copy this prompt in. I'm going to start a new conversation. This is brand new. It has nothing to do with these files necessarily. Oh yeah, it does actually. I'm a feedlot manager learning how to use AI with exported Fusion data. Use only the attached file. So let's just grab a file. We'll just use the SAML one. Suggest 10 practical questions I could ask about this record. Focus on questions that could lead to better management, better understanding of performance, or better data quality. Do not answer the questions yet. Group summary topic. So basically, you can use the AI to help you know how you can use the AI or what kinds of questions you might ask. And it can come back again outside the box type thinking that can be very useful. So here it looked at that actual data of that animal, figured out the structure in it, and came back with some health and treatment questions that you could ask, some performance and growth, et cetera, et cetera. So just for fun, we could just continue the conversation and say, answer number 7. Because we're now in the conversation, we're bound into kind of brainstorming. I don't have to have a full structured prompt. I can just do something very quickly, like I just did, which refers to another question. And it's smart enough to know how to look for an answer. So, okay. All right. One more example, and then we're going to basically be done. I want to show how you can attach more than one file for different purposes. The example I'm going to use is so that you can have the output formatted in a very specific way, but you could imagine doing the same thing with other assets. Like I'll give one simple example just off the top of my head. Let's say you had an export of weather data that covered the weather in your area for the same life of a lot. You could upload that as part of this information and ask it to say, look at the weather data, look at this lot's performance, and then ask some questions related to the two of them. What we're doing here is slightly simpler than that, but it's a kind of a similar idea. So I'm going to start a new conversation. We're going to grab the prompt, which is example 7 here. Get rid of this. Paste that in. I think I need a lot for this one, was it? Let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to grab a lot. It doesn't really matter which one I use. So I've attached a lot file here. But I want to create another, I want to attach another file. So this one is an output template. And ChatGPT can create one of these for you. This is created using a format called Markdown. It's actually a small little bit of information about Markdown is in the handout that will be given you, and you can learn lots more about it on the web. It's about AIs understand Markdown really well. And basically, if there's like one number sign in front of a row, that means this is a big heading. And if there's two, it means it's like a next level of heading or a little bit smaller heading. So it's kind of telling it that to follow a certain structure. It wants to have a lot review. It wants to have a plain language summary section with 2 or 3 sentences. It wants to have some three key observations in a bullet point form, etc. So just keep this in mind. I'm going to set it off to the side so you can see it. And we're going to take that same file, this template file, and drag it in there as well. Now let's look at the prompt. Use the attached Fusion lot export and attached Markdown output template. Create a short lot review for the lead feedlot manager. And I'm not going to read the rest of the prompt. I'm just going to hit return and you'll see what happens. Before, I've been showing you how if you're very specific with your task and your prompt, you'll get a very specific answer. Here we're being even more specific and we're telling it exactly how we want it to even format the answer. And so you'll see, remember, we wanted it to start with a heading, a big heading, lot review. It's done that. Then there's supposed to be a plain language summary, which there is. And then we wanted 2 or 3 sentences. And so it looks like we have 2 sentences. Then we wanted key observations with 3 bullet points, which we have, possible explanations, etc., etc. So you can actually control your output very, very specifically when you start using this kind of a technique. Now, I know this class isn't long enough to really go into a lot of detail about these kinds of techniques. I just want to give you a sneak peek, basically whet your appetite for some of these kinds of things that you can do, so that if you're interested, you can research more and play around and sort of practice all of these things. So, okay, I do have a handout, which I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I'll share it again if there's any questions. But in the chat, I'm going to drop this PDF. Oh, Ben, it's telling me I can't send a file due to admin restrictions. I'm going to give Ben this file and then he can put it in the chat. And then also, if anybody isn't able to get it and wants it, if you want to just reach out to Ben after the class, then he'll be able to just email it to you or send it to you however you need. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again for a minute now that I've got that, and I'll just show you what the handout is really quickly. Whoops. So it's just a PDF. It kind of does a summary of what I've talked about, but I want to get down here. It includes the sort of principles you can use when you're creating a good prompt. And then all the prompts that I used today in the class are in here. So you can use those, just copy and paste these out, copy them into a file if you want, or right into your AI and use those. But I do encourage you to start coming up with your own prompts as you play with this and you start to get certain kinds of data that you want. But all of those are there. And then near the end of the file or the handout, there's just a list of a whole bunch of questions. And again, you can ask ChatGPT or Claude or whatever AI you're using to give you a list of questions based on your role and stuff. But if you're just looking for some rough ideas to get started, you can look at these. Obviously, these aren't full prompts. They don't have all the ideas for a prompt. They're just to kind of give you a rough idea of what's there. So, okay, I'm going to stop there and just ask if there's any questions. That's the material I wanted to cover, but I'm happy to go over any questions anyone has. Looks like we're good. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending.
Can,
Appreciate that. Yeah, Daryl?
how many lots could you put in a query to compare? Like, can you put in 10 lots? Or
That's a good question. I can't give you an exact number. It goes back to the idea of a context window and that context windows aren't very big. And so I don't think I don't think it would be useful to put more than just a handful. 10 would probably really be pushing it. You might get away with it. You'd have to try it and see. But this tool really isn't made for comparing a large number of lots. So that's a really good point. Uh, if we turn this into an actual feature that's baked right into Fusion, the way we can do things under the hood would be quite different. And so it would be possible to deal with a lot more lots at the same time. But as an experimental feature, because of how big each of those JSON files is, yeah, I think more than 3 or 4 or 5 is probably not going to lead to useful results in most cases. So, okay, any other questions? I'd
I'm just
be,
trying to get that file in here and it's not working for me.
oh, okay. Sounds good. Well, I guess we'll just ask you, whoever wants it, to contact Ben, and more than happy to send it out to anyone who wants it. So feel free to spread it around. It's anyone who wants it is welcome to have it. So, or Ben, maybe you even have a way of seeing who was at the meeting and emailing it to everyone. That
Yeah,
might be better.
I should be able to do that.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I don't know if this was too basic of a class or information in this class or too much. Let us know that if you want. We'd be happy to go either direction in the future and have an even more basic class or a more complex class down the road if you want. So, but anyway, thank you for attending. Hopefully it was useful. And if no one else has any more questions, I'll say goodbye.
all right. Thank you very much, Canon. It was very useful.
Great. Thanks, everyone.